Salve, sono Davide Moscone dell'Associazione Spazio Asperger di Roma. Siamo un'associazione di promozione culturale, scientifica e di supporto per le persone appartenenti allo spettro autistico ad alto funzionamento come la sindrome di Asperger, e faccio parte del direttivo di questa associazione insieme a Giorgio Pomettini, che è il nostro web designer, e a David Vanni, che è il principale articolista e moderatore del forum, e mi trovo ad Oxford insieme al dottor Tony Attwood, uno dei più grandi esperti sulla sindrome di Asperger, per porgli alcune domande. Good morning, Tony.
Good morning.
It's such a pleasure to see you again.
Thank you.
On behalf of Spazio Asperger and its readers, I would like to ask you some questions.
I'm delighted to answer.
Ok, let's begin. Allora, iniziamo con la prima domanda. Spazio Asperger promuove un approccio sociale all'Asperger, quindi non solo i deficit, ma anche e soprattutto i punti di forza. Proprio come sostenuto dall'articolo La scoperta dei criteri aspie, scritto da lei insieme a Carol Gray. Oltre agli articoli divulgativi scientifici e alle testimonianze di persone direttamente coinvolte nell'Asperger, sia aspie che parenti, moderiamo un forum dove le persone Asperger possono trovare uno spazio virtuale dove ricevere supporto e la possibilità di conoscere altre persone simili. Poiché per l'Italia è una cosa nuova, dalla sua esperienza internazionale, come possono questi luoghi di incontro virtuale supportare gli aspie e i loro familiari nel processo di consapevolezza della propria particolare condizione? Quali criticità possono emergere? Può essere utile per i genitori di bambini Asperger o autistici leggere questi forum dove scrivono gli adulti per capire i propri figli?
A very good question. And we have found that organising a forum for people with Asperger syndrome and those who love and support them has been beneficial in many ways. One, a sense of identity, so that the person feels that there is a group or a culture that I belong to, that support me. Now that also means that some with Asperger's can help each other. They can be adults who can help the teenagers cope with bullying and teasing, give advice on relationships. They can be what I call the wise mentors of their culture. It's also an opportunity of making good friends. Part of friendship is someone who's had similar experiences and similar values, so friendships can be formed too. But not only is it an exchange of information about Asperger's, it's also an opportunity to have an unofficial evaluation of professionals and who do you recommend and who's going to be good for various topics. It also helps parents because they can be in touch with each other, and they can also see some of the outcomes and what they will need to prepare their younger person for as the problems of adult years. It's also an opportunity of laughter and fun, and an opportunity to really enjoy the experiences without feeling I've got to explain everything. They know. Now, if there are going to be difficulties, one can be in any group of people, there may be clashes of personality. And those with Asperger's have very distinct personalities. So if there's any advice, it is not to be critical or judgmental of other people, and it's not a forum for arguments. It's a forum for support, not criticism.
Grazie Tony, passiamo alla prossima domanda. Alcuni aspie, soprattutto le giovani donne, hanno un livello relativamente alto di consapevolezza sociale e spesso cercano di adattarsi mimando i pari o modelli di riferimento. Se questo da un lato può essere buono, dall'altro spesso induce ansia e può portare a comportamenti problematici o fuori contesto anche rispetto ai pari, in quanto spesso mancano comunque di abilità più elaborate di teoria della mente. Come è meglio aiutare questo sottogruppo di persone?
Someone with Asperger syndrome is different, and it depends on how they cope with and adjust to their difference. Sometimes the boys and men can be intrusive, abrasive, and difficult, whereas the girls and women are more constructive and intelligent in the way they cope. And one of the ways they cope is by recognizing I'm different to others, but I must copy them to be part of the group. But that means they are denying who they really are. It's an artificial process. It's like being on stage all the time. It's exhausting. You have your role, you have your script, and for that individual, they may then fear that the mask must never come away. They must never show who they really are, because those who see that may not like that person. It leads to anxiety that they might make a mistake. but also depression on the basis of low self-esteem, of feeling the inner me is so bad, I must hide that. So what I do as a psychologist is encourage the person to be true to who they really are, so that they have an opportunity to realise you're not bad, you're not defective, you're different, and people should accept you for who you are. And it is artificial, exhausting, and bad for your mental health if you become an artificial person. Although the difficulties can be that they can become what people want them to be so well that other people cannot believe they have Asperger's. But you're so social. We have in England the fairy story for children of Cinderella at the ball at midnight, and I can cope no longer. And so the person can fake it. They can have an ability to be sociable, smile, but the next day, exhausting. They have what we call a social migraine, and they're absolutely exhausted, and they don't want other people to see who they really are. So I can understand why that strategy is used. And sometimes you do need to act, but only temporarily. I'll use a phrase that we use in England: when in Rome, do as Romans do. And so that's what we say: when in Rome, do as Romans do.
Grazie per la risposta. Passiamo alla successiva. Considerato che oggi sappiamo che l'autismo è un continuum vastissimo di condizioni assai diversificate, che in parte saranno raggruppate nel prossimo DSM quinto, gli strumenti attualmente previsti dai protocolli di diagnosi usati spesso nella letteratura scientifica per individuare l'autismo, quanto sono efficaci per lo screening e la diagnosi della sindrome di Asperger negli adulti?
As a clinician, I'm obviously involved in diagnostic assessments. And when it comes to the area of autism spectrum conditions that we call Asperger syndrome, or high-functioning autism, or mild autism, we are fairly good at describing boys. The original descriptions were of boys. However, we know the girls are there, but they hide, they mimic, they have an ability to pretend to be normal. And when they are exhausted and very stressed, it may be only in their adolescent years that we pick up depression, anxiety disorder, eating disorder, intense emotions that leads to a diagnostic assessment. So we're only just starting to understand how to identify girls, especially teenage girls with Asperger's syndrome. The other area is the adults who never had diagnostic assessments when they were young. They always felt that they were different. And they've tried to accommodate that difference and create a self-understanding or scaffolding of who I am and how I'm going to succeed. And so we now need new strategies to identify the adults. And sometimes I will give interviews on the radio. And the radio station will then have hundreds of phone calls from people who are driving their car, listening at home, who suddenly realize, you just described me. That was me as a child. That was perfect. But nobody knew that when I was a child. And so we find that we are developing strategies, questionnaires, ways of interviewing the person about their childhood, developmental history and so on, that confirms the diagnosis. What we find is initially there's an enormous sense of, relief. Now I know. I am not mad. I am not bad. I am different. I can now explain myself to people. I have literature, I have information, I have validation for my characteristics. But then there can be a next stage of despair. But where are the services? I have Asperger's, but who's to help me? That's where that support group is so valuable. Because sometimes the best support comes not from professionals, but from other people with Asperger's syndrome. So for the adults, they're often greatly relieved. I can make better decisions in my career, in my understanding of myself, and in relationships. I know what I'm going to be good at and what I should avoid. I have a better understanding for decisions in life. But there's also a need for understanding. How do I explain it to my family? How do I explain it to my work colleagues? Will they understand it? Will there be someone I can talk to about my problems that knows Asperger syndrome? So, although it answers a major question, it causes new questions.
Grazie, passiamo alla domanda successiva. Sul nostro forum un numero sempre crescente di persone che hanno un discreto livello adattivo, quindi lavorano o studiano, scrivono dicendo di riconoscersi nelle caratteristiche dell'Asperger e chiedono come fare a ricevere una diagnosi. Ha senso fare una diagnosi di Asperger ad una persona che ha un discreto livello adattivo, così come si potrebbe fare con una diagnosi di ansia o depressione? Ci sono degli strumenti diagnostici adatti ed è importante rilevare anche eventuali comorbidità?
You've chosen some very good questions. And when we look at this, there are varying degrees of expression. And the degree of expression changes over time and with stress. The more stressed the person is, the more the characteristics can occur. But someone can have the profile, but not the disability. In other words, they have a parent, partner, friends, colleagues who understand them and support them. And so the characteristics are minimized in what we call an Asperger-friendly environment. But if that relative dies, moves, goes, change of manager, all those sorts of things can cause that person to have increased stress. Now, technically, the diagnosis is given to identify someone who needs government support. In other words, access to psychologists, perhaps a psychiatrist, or various people to assist them. Sometimes the person here needs advice rather than psychotherapy. It may be advice on choosing the right career and difficulties, for example, in being promoted to management, where interpersonal skills are needed more. It may be that they need counselling in relationships, that they need to understand how to be successful in finding and keeping a long-term relationship. But there are other issues that you raise in that question. And that is in terms of what we call associated characteristics. Asperger's is a problem in terms of being a minority in a world of social zealots. And so the person is under extreme stress, can have low self-esteem, and may develop depression, may develop anxiety about coping with change or making mistakes, can become angry at the illogicality of the world or sometimes their difficulties, or have, and this is an Asperger characteristic, confusion regarding affection, how to express it, when to express it, etc. So the person may be successful in their academic or employment life, but have major difficulties in their personal life and emotions. So they may need treatment, but those treatments were designed for typical people. And those with Asperger's have a brain that is wired differently, not defectively, but differently. And those psychotherapies tend to have been based on typical people who have an ability to explore, describe, and analyse their internal thoughts and feelings easily. For those with Asperger's, that's not easy. So what's needed are psychotherapists who really do understand the different way of thinking, the different life experiences, and how to translate those therapies for people with Asperger syndrome.
Grazie Tony, passiamo alla domanda successiva. Spesso molte donne non vengono riconosciute in questa particolare condizione. Quali sono le caratteristiche più distintive dell'Asperger al femminile e quali le eventuali comorbidità più frequenti?
As time goes by, I'm understanding more about how women cope with the being different. And what they may do throughout their life is try to cope with that difference. One is to escape into imagination. And so that person may not be valued and accepted by others, but they escape into reading fiction. And they're great readers of fantasy novels, and they write fantasy novels. and they have imaginary friends. They're not a problem at school to other people, but they realise if I'm not respected and valued in this world, I'd escape into imagination, and if they're talented, they may do that as a writer, as an artist, as sometimes an actor. And some will develop the ability to act so well that I was talking to someone with Asperger's who is a professional actor, who said, in response to people saying, but you must be so anxious on stage, he said, no, I'm very happy on stage because I know what she's going to say, I know what he's going to say, I know what I say, I know where I stand. I'm relaxed. Life is predictable. So some may be successful in that imitation to make it a career, and they are born mimic, they have the ability to act the persona of other people. But what we have to do is see behind the facade, behind the mask, to identify who is the real person. So they can escape into imagination. They can use imitation and acting. They can be very well behaved so as not to be noticed. But in Asperger teenagers, there are two groups. One who are so good, so perfect, and they try not to get into trouble. And the others think, to hell, I'll change my hair, I'll wear piercings, I'll have tattoos, I hate the world. So, and there's, sorry if you can use, okay, that's, if you have that in Italy, to the world. And they, as we say in England, go off the rails because they hate the world, so why should I be consistent? There may be ways of forming relationships with animals, so that they have lots of cats and dogs and horses and so on, so they relate to animals better than people. One of the things that the women with Asperger's can be very good at is very caring and be in the caring professions. They can be very good with little children or as nurses and have an ability to show that compassion to others to a remarkable degree. In other areas, the women, I find, are unfortunately vulnerable to relationship predators. They're not very good at character judgments and low self-esteem. Don't have a group of friends to check that someone is of good character. Become intoxicated with the attention. And they are very vulnerable to bad relationships and people taking advantage of them. So there can be a history of that. Another aspect that occurs for the women is becoming a mother. And they can make excellent mothers. But the problem is confidence. A typical mother intuitively knows how to be a good mother. Whereas these mothers are often unsure, am I a good mother? Am I doing the right thing? And they may need a lot of reassurance. So we're identifying some of the features. For example, the person's face may be very still. I know in Italy, people are very, they express things with their face, etc. But sometimes the girls and women are very still and very flat when they should be expressing emotion. Or they take a second or two to reply because they're thinking. Because normally the response, the rapport, the being in tune with the body language straight away, here it's, oh yeah, and there's a fraction of a second delay as they think, what am I supposed to say or do? And so it's very hard at this stage to define precisely what it is. But as a clinician, and this sounds unprofessional, it's a feeling. Because over the years, I've developed a schema, an internal conceptualization of hundreds, if not several thousand women with Asperger's, and how they fit into the variety that I've seen. And there are many different ways. And some of the women I have found have taken an interest in psychology. And I hope that one day they will develop a psychotherapy by aspies, for aspies, conducted by aspies, because they understand it.
Grazie Tony, passiamo alla domanda successiva. La CBT è un intervento efficace per insegnare a controllare emozioni negative come rabbia ed ansia. Quali sono i principali fattori da prendere in considerazione per adattare un programma CBT al profilo cognitivo della singola persona?
People with Asperger's are very logical. They're very scientific and factual. And the advantage of cognitive behavior therapy, it is a very logical, factual approach. It is not analytical in the sense of analysing dreams or analysing your childhood. And sometimes those with Asperger's find that very difficult to relate to, very difficult to disclose their inner thoughts and feelings, find the words to do that, to see the projection, the symbolism, and all those sorts of components. They're often very confused on an individual basis or in a group basis to relate to all the others. The advantage of cognitive behavior therapy is it begins with a scientific explanation of what are emotions, why do you have them, how they affect your body, your thinking, and your life. And then going through practical and logical strategies of how to cope with those specific feelings. It, in a way, is a recipe rather than an intuitive analytical approach. And they like that. They like to know, these are my signals, my heart rate is going up, I'm having perspiration. This means my thermometer of emotion is rising. Therefore, I have a choice. I can do this, 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 or this. Now I feel better. So there's a logic, a sequence, a structure that they find very appealing. And so cognitive behavior therapy was originally designed for typical people, but it suits the Asperger mindset exactly. They want to know why, but more importantly, what do I do? And it provides that.
Grazie Tony, passiamo all'ultima domanda. Abbiamo recentemente intervistato su Spazio Asperger Steven Hayes riguardo all'ACT. Sul suo sito abbiamo letto della ricerca sull'uso dell'ACT per aiutare i genitori con figli nello spettro autistico. Ci può parlare dei risultati ottenuti e se ritiene che tale terapia possa essere utile anche negli adulti Asperger?
My simple answer to that question is yes. CBT has evolved into many forms. And I think all those forms can be valuable for those with Asperger's syndrome. There is an unfortunate characteristic in Asperger's to catastrophize, to have very intense emotions. But the good news is it's usually of short duration. In fact, it may be only minutes or hours, but very intense. Mindfulness is to accept it, to say it will go. It's intense, it's horrible, but soon I will be back to my usual self. I can fight it, I can do strategies to express the energy to cope with it, or I can just say, it's real, I'm there, it will go. Chill out is a phrase that we would use. But another aspect is acceptance, and it's not just acceptance of the situation, it's acceptance of the self, and not to feel bad. Because one of the issues of when you're anxious and you make mistakes is that I am bad, therefore this will be always my life, and I really am in such pain. Perhaps suicide is my only way of ending the pain, because I am defective. So it's looking at acceptance of the self, and that you're okay to make mistakes, that you are human. And so there are a range of strategies that we would use that really rely on the clinician determining the personality of the person with Asperger's. Each is unique. And then using what we call an eclectic approach of the different components for that individual. So for example, my friend and colleague Dr. Michelle Garnett and I are currently writing a book on a range of cognitive behavior therapy strategies that cover depression, anxiety, anger, affection, self, sexuality, a whole range of things. And what we will do is have about a dozen sections for each one. So the clinician decides, I need 5 sessions from the depression module. I need about 3 sessions from the anxiety. There are issues of bullying and teasing, so I will need to take 6 sessions from the bullying and teasing, 2 sessions from the affection, to suit that individual who is unique. So it is not one approach that will suit everybody, it's flexibility. But for those with Asperger's, you also have to explain to them the nature of the therapeutic relationship. You're not a parent, you're not a friend, you're not a teacher. And although you are listening and though you are supporting, you're not romantically attached. And to understand the conventions of not sending an email to your therapist 5 times a day. And it's really understanding that for the therapist, you've got to be trusted. And those with Asperger's have a history of meeting people who have not really understood them. And they can be very quick in determining whether they like you or don't like you. Doesn't mean that you're a bad therapist, but they can make instant decisions of whether they like you or not. And secondly, they've got to trust that what you suggest is better than the strategies they've been using. For their intense emotions, they've already started using strategies. But they work, and they have to trust that what you're going to suggest is actually better.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Professor Attwood. It has been a pleasure to interview you. Looking forward to hopefully see you in Rome for the conference in June 2013.
Yes,
Okay?
thank you. I'd be delighted to see people. I have never been to Italy. I'm looking forward to going to Rome. And do come along, and this has given you an introduction to the sorts of topics we will focus on. So if you want more, come to the presentation in June next year. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.